The only zero-sum part of Bitcoin is that there's a pretty fixed amount, so you better get what you can while you can get it. Having friends buy Bitcoin is like watching them win the lottery slowly. What governments don't like is at a certain level, they don't like things that they don't control, obviously. If the US government starts to move to make that worthless, you're going to upset your citizens. Bitcoiners are okay with that chop because to us, confusingly, the distress is a sign that Bitcoin's working. So when Bitcoin starts to heat up, everyone gets a little excited and their sentiment gets better and then it heats up even more. It's a reflexive loop. Bitcoin is a complex system, the way it is today. It combines the sort of mimetic aspects of religion with the utility of money. Is it in the trillions? Of course, already is in the trillions. Is it in the tens of trillions? 100%. My question is, by that point, what's a dollar worth?
Appreciate you being here, Matt. Thank you so much. Some of these things we're talking about offline for a reason, but at the same time, everyone's freaking out. Like no one knows seemingly what's going on in the world. But the average Bitcoiner, I feel like you have a pretty good grasp on reality, and and none of us know everything. But you feel like, hey, if we just zoom out enough, you can really see trends. You can really see things and where things are going, and the global order and things of that nature. But you can kind of be above it, or at least you're outside of it. You're off the Titanic on the lifeboat somewhere. There's massive wealth transfers happening and things of that nature. So when you kind of zoom out, you just kind of start there, I guess, and we can start drilling into some of these topics. But how do you see things just shaking out when you kind of like your overarching structure of the world, I guess, in a way, in what's happening right now?
As I think about Bitcoin and Bitcoin miners and Bitcoin related folks, the very clear thing is that they're a group of people that have just shown to be very certain in uncertainty. That's been true for over a decade. You've got a group of people that had high conviction in what was at the time a very contrarian bet, still frankly contrarian in many circles, and that sort of sense of self and sense of certainty is itself a superpower. So as you look at the world today, very volatile in numerous ways, I think Bitcoin folks are actually pretty well equipped for that, right? The idea that the currency regime is under strain, leverage entering or leaving the system, geopolitical tensions, these are not novel concepts to folks who come from a Bitcoin background. And I think that therein lies the strength of the community. Yeah.
And I mentioned you too. I was talking to Doomberg, and I know you know him well. He's not someone that has Bitcoin. He understands Bitcoin in the sense of like, hey, it's has the properties. He doesn't believe anything's money. Like he doesn't believe we have a money right now, right? And I was talking to him about this idealism versus pragmatism, and like you just kind of mentioned, like as a miner, you kind of have to live in the future. As a Bitcoiner, you have to live in the future, and you have to kind of predict where the world is going in that sense. And you're living in the future, where someone like Doomberg is much more of a pragmatist, I would say, and a realist of like, hey, the world is this right now. Like we use dollars, I use dollars, you use dollars. No one's trading in gold and silver or Bitcoin in the general sense of the world we're talking about, and not these isolated incidences. So, where does that leave? Like, again, this transfer of wealth is happening. Like, where do you think people wake up maybe? Because I would say a lot of people are missing it in that sense. I understand where Doomberg's coming from, and I respect that. But I think a lot of it is, Bitcoin, if you see it as, hey, we're pulling society this way. This is the answer. And we're going to keep talking about it. And we're going to keep pulling people towards the truth. I mean, is that how you see it just in a broader scope?
Now, that's a very interesting question. I tend to think about things in this framework where there's gradients and there's diffusion, where things tend to start in one cluster, one specific area. And then over time, whether it's information or money supply or whatever technology, it diffuses along a path. And so as you think about Doomberg, as you mentioned with energy, they very famously talk about how with electrons, every electron that's pulled out of the ground will get used in the form of energy, right? Whether it's oil, gas, you name it. Even if it's not burned in the UK and they decide to cut for carbon reasons, they want to cut their emissions there, that same barrel of oil is going somewhere and will be burned. And so there's this constant diffusion of energy around the world. It will always find a point where it can get used. I think when you look at things like Bitcoin as another example, Bitcoin is something that has grown in adoption through diffusion. And so Bitcoin initially had that very early contingent of folks. You had people that were maybe true believers in decentralized currency or skeptical of the monetary system, et cetera. And that was the core group. And then over time, they evangelized. And like any new technology, there's a sales component. People tend to underestimate that. I think they view technology as something that stands by its own merit. But if you're not diffusing that technology, you're not getting it out there, it's not going to achieve worldwide adoption or large-scale adoption. And so as you look at Bitcoin as one technology, essentially it solves different problems for different people. There are people that want a store of value that is outside of the local fiat system. That's great. There's people that are probably interested in the block space and what can be done with that as sort of an uncensorable place to have a ledger. There are different problems that this technology can solve, and so things move along these diffusion gradients over time and at different speeds.
Yeah, and that leads perfectly to something I was thinking and wanted to ask you, which was, what do you think is needed for that transition? Like, what do you think it's and the number go up, just needs to keep going up, and it goes to 500,000, it goes to 1 million, and it goes to 2 million, and people like finally start waking up? I mean, I have my own reservations in the sense of like, I think we're going to have maybe some social unrest, maybe geared towards Bitcoiners at that point, because governments of the world or whoever's not in is going to be pointing to, we've already seen it. I mean, like, hey, they're psychopaths, like whatever.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the contrast to that is, do we need max pain? Do we need way more pain? I mean, we got 50-year mortgages and 15-year auto loans, like all these kicking of the can down the road, $1.5 trillion budget that Trump just announced, and we just crossed $1 trillion. So it seems like we're trying to kick the can. We need max pain. I don't know how close max pain really is. I think we're very far away. I'm like, where do you see this point where people wake up and realize like the confidence I have in this dollar and this fiat currency is gone?
Yeah, what you're describing to me is what is typically called a preference cascade, where people have these inner preferences, these different preferences that are not expressed, and then something happens. There's a catalyst. There's somewhat of this jolt to the system, and people start to reveal their preference versus what was stated before. They suddenly like, you know what, wholesale. I don't want to be here. I want to be over there. I don't want to do this. I'm going to do that. And so to give an example with currency, what you're somewhat describing would be the equivalent of a preference cascade where people prefer not to have, say, the US dollar. Now, I think you'd probably start to see that in other currencies first. Currency crashes have happened, frankly, since times immemorial. It's always a question of confidence. And so rather than look at the dollar, maybe we could take something like the British pound. And so I've written, and you can see my work on X, I've written about the British pound and the sterling. And that is a currency that has actually had several attempts to kind of break the confidence over the decades, right? There was a very famous instance of George Soros breaking the Bank of England. So this is something where suddenly a preference cascade emerged where people did not want to hold sterling, or they were at least not as bullish on it as the market in the United Kingdom wanted them to be. And so when it comes to Bitcoin, you can see kind of leaps, or you could see a gradual, as I said, this sort of diffusion or this gradient. And so with the leaps, that would be some sort of revealed preference where people realize maybe it's not the dollar, maybe it's like the in Nigeria like the naira or something like that, right? And they have access to another store of wealth, and they choose to flip. That's where stable coins have been very interesting to me. There's an idea that stable coins are somewhat of a trapdoor for Bitcoin. They get people into the digital ecosystem. They get their currency out of the sort of the centralized hands of a given bank. Once you're already in the stablecoin realm, it's a hop, skip, and a jump into Bitcoin. It really is. And so whether you want to make that jump today or tomorrow or wherever, it's a lot easier to onboard someone into Bitcoin if they're already in blockchain-based financials. And so that is something that I think provides the opportunity for those cascades to happen much faster than they used to be. Buying Bitcoin, as you probably know, was an ordeal. Still, frankly, for many people, is an ordeal. The less of an ordeal that it becomes, the faster these things can happen, because there just aren't these barriers that there have been historically.
Yeah, it is interesting because it's, we do get a lot of that over the years, right? The objection of, well, I guess from multiple angles, one of them just being, I guess, opponents of Bitcoin saying, hey, Bitcoin is a precursor to a CBDC. It's just people trying to get you used to that and things of that nature, which, again, it's not a great thing to have.
I would turn that around. I would turn that around. I think CBDCs could be frankly a precursor to Bitcoin. Now, there's a lot of caveats to that, right? And I think that the direction that the United States went in, where it's a private, they're private considerations. They're under some public guidelines and rules. But the form of the digital dollar that we're going to get is going to be something that may actually end up being somewhat of an ally to the Bitcoin community, at least insofar as it's easy to flip.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because there's different angles you could take with it. And that is one of them. It's funny because that's what I was kind of leading into. But the other part of it is we've had digital, this is where I have a problem with people saying that self-custody is tough, or like all these different things. And like, yeah, does it take a few minutes to learn and things of this nature? Yeah, of course, just like anything, driving a car or whatever it is. But people have been using digital stuff for decades. I mean, we've had, credit cards, all these different things. It's like, it's the same thing. So that, if anything, the digital dollar, which is what everyone uses nowadays, the stable coins, maybe an extension of that, that, people have been using that for decades. So people have been used to that. It's already a thing. So again, some of those things I feel like they fall on deaf ears.
I fully agree with you. I would almost analogize it to a running watch. I don't know if you run, but if you've got say a Garmin or whatnot, right? You get outside and you look down and you click two buttons and you're suddenly, you've got multiple satellites vectoring in on your position. I think at least 3 or 4, and you're good to go. And you hit two buttons, and now you've got this GPS tracking in place. I didn't have to do the differential calculus to go for my run. I just had to hit two buttons. That is a little bit like what I think will happen with Bitcoin. You don't necessarily need to be a core developer to get into this technology. It is getting easier every day. Most people don't understand how a carburetor works, but they drive a car, right? These are just the realities of technologies. I think early adopters will always have a little bit of an edge to something you'd said earlier. You want to be a little bit in the future. I think it's again, it comes back to diffusion. If you can see what tomorrow looks like because you're already living in it, I think you see this with coding, for example, and people that are very hyped now about agentic coding. Those are technologies that live in the command line interface, and in a matter of weeks to months, are going to be much more accessible to the average tech user. And so, as long as Bitcoin continues to become more adoptable, it will become more adopted.
All right, real talk for a second. We all know health insurance is basically a fiat system of healthcare. The biggest debauchery there is. It's expensive, confusing. Somehow you still end up paying hundreds of dollars for a Band-Aid. We moved to crowd sharing almost 5 years ago. It's the best decision we ever made. Instead of sending your money to the insurance company's black hole, you join a like-minded community that directly funds each other's medical bills. Simple, transparent, way cheaper, and that difference you save, you can invest in Bitcoin. It's an amazing win-win. And look, we're part of the Bitcoin community because we believe in freedom, decentralization. Crowd Health brings that same mindset to healthcare. You choose your doctor, you pay in cash, and the community's got your back when the big bills hit. No networks, no middlemen, no bureaucrats trying to approve your care. Just people helping people the way it should be. You make decisions about your health. That's as sovereign as it gets. So if you're ready to take the orange pill for your health, this open enrollment, go to Join Crowd Health to get started for $99 for your first 3 months using code Brandon at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com, code Brandon. Crowd Health is not insurance. Opt out. Take your power back. This is how we win. Generational wealth doesn't happen by accident. Bitcoin fixed the money, but it didn't fix the system of protecting and passing it on. Bitcoiners, we have to live in two different worlds, idealism versus pragmatism. That's where Meanwhile comes in. It's the world's first Bitcoin-denominated life insurance company, regulated in Bermuda and built entirely by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. With Meanwhile, long-term holders can grow and protect their Bitcoin wealth through tax-free policy loans, no repayment obligation, no margin call risk, while making inheritance simple and secure and entirely in Bitcoin. It's about sovereignty, stewardship, and building a legacy that lasts centuries. Because if Bitcoin is forever, your plan should be too. Learn more and sign up with code 4QPBWC at meanwhile.bm. That's meanwhile.bm, code 4QPBWC, or just sign up in the link in the description below.
Yeah, and it's funny too. Again, thinking of Doomberg, his things, don't be a martyr and don't be a whistleblower. And also, so I say that because his other thing of, if you're early, you are wrong. And that's what we were talking about with Bitcoin, right? I feel like that is sometimes where Bitcoiners, we can tend to trip ourselves up at times because we are early. Like people think, oh, I'm late. Like, no, we're early. Like we're really early to Bitcoin. And that's why I think it feels hard at times. Would you agree with that sentiment from him? Because I feel like he kind of nails it with that. And I feel like we forget that.
Yeah, I agree. Being early is being wrong. It does depend on your horizon. I've jokingly told friends that having friends buy Bitcoin is like watching them win the lottery slowly. I mean, it just is what it is. That being said, there's stories, and I'm sure you've got dozens of them for folks as well, where there was some other shinier currency, some other future of crypto, and I won't besmirch some of these other tokens, but people got into shiny object syndrome, and they didn't want to just stop at Bitcoin, and frankly, for a lot of them, that impatience really did cost them. So to your point, as I think about trades or I think about these adoption curves, there's a matter of direction, and then there's a matter of duration. And for Bitcoin, directionally, Bitcoin has gone up, and I think will continue to go up. Duration wise, yeah, 2025 was an interesting year. If you looked at where we started 2025, if you zoomed out and ignorant of everything, you at the end of 2025 told me that we would have a pro-crypto presidential administration. We would have increased adoption by the B2B community, more consumer-facing apps, multiple central banks expressing interest, multiple sovereign wealth funds, Harvard's endowment, basically increased institutional adoption and increased consumer awareness of Bitcoin, and a regulatory regime that was good. We actually got everything. I then, if you ask me what's the price of Bitcoin, I would say, oh, this is a $250,000 a year. It sounds like. I mean, look at all we've done, and yet it was like frankly flat to down. And I think that surprised a lot of folks because again, directionally, these were all great things, and the fruits that were planted, those seeds that were planted, will bear fruit. But yeah, over a duration, you could argue it was a pretty tough 12 months for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Like how is global mining just in general, just the geopolitical things that are going on right now, the shocks, whether it's Venezuela or, hey, it's going to be Cuba next, then Greenland, and there's stuff going on in the Middle East and the Far East, like how do you seen that shaping the system? I guess it might be too early to tell some of these recent things, but just kind of over time here, how have you seen some of these global events, playing out with the mining industry?
Excellent question. The way I tend to think about mining, taking a step back, is this is an industry predicated upon operational discipline. If you were to show an MBA textbook what the perfect operating business would look like from an academic standpoint, I think Bitcoin mining would probably be in there. You're buying energy, and there's a spread with Bitcoin. Now, we don't sell the Bitcoin, but some do, right? But the customer is abstracted away. This is a pure commodity. It's totally fungible. It really just comes down to how well you can maintain the spread between the market price of Bitcoin and your price of energy, right? So this is an industry that is predicated upon operational discipline. When it comes to geopolitical events, we get buffeted same as everyone else. Now, I don't have to worry about customer risk the same way that I would if I was selling iPhones, for example. But thinking back a few years to Ukraine, people at the time were asking me about my thoughts on like Fed policy, which of course is very important for Bitcoin and monetary regimes. They were somewhat surprised when I said that I was actually spending more time looking at the land war in Europe and the front and what the implications were for natural gas prices than I was looking at anything related to Fed policy. Because at that time, so much of the industry, ourselves and others, were really exposed to natural gas prices. And so the geopolitical bent of Bitcoin is actually pretty important, whether it's trade, tariffs, things like that, export licenses, chips. You need to know a little bit about a lot of things to be successful, so you don't get surprised. And of course, things will surprise you, but that's why you have to be a systems thinker, right? Venezuela has some Bitcoin mining. Iran has some Bitcoin mining. They could have, if their regime changes and the power grids in both places improve, they could actually have more mining in 5 years than they do today, or they could have less. It's very hard to tell, but you want to be very aware of what people around the world are up to when it comes to your industry.
So speaking of that, actually, I was going to kind of keep going down this line, but you just mentioned that. I would love to get your thoughts, because I've seen conflicting things about just Venezuela, the Bitcoin mining that is going on there. Whether it's nuclear mining, like what's happening there. Could you shed some light, and maybe anything on what's going on there?
Venezuela has always been interesting. Bitcoin mining as an industry is fascinating. I think 20 to 30% of hash rate is in the United States, American Bitcoin among them. We've got about 25 exahash today. So we're producing, let's say, 8 to 10 Bitcoin per day. We're a moderate player. There are players with higher nameplate capacities, but for us, we're focused on operational discipline. So I think we're better than the average bear when it comes to keeping the Bitcoin that you've made. So what that means, though, when 20 to 30% of the Bitcoin mining is in the United States, is that 70% or so is somewhere else. Those folks don't come to conferences would be one way to put it, right? I'm not at the Bitcoin 2026 is in Las Vegas this year. I don't think I'll be rubbing shoulders with the Ayatollah's Bitcoin miner, right? So there's just a little bit of an interesting dispersion pattern, I would say, among folks. It may be somewhat like oil in that case, where you've got folks out of the Permian, West Texas, and they're doing things, and there's people in Papua New Guinea doing the same thing, but they're not talking to each other except through market price. Right. This is almost a Milton Friedman type price signals communication. So as you think about Venezuela historically in the industry was a place where machines went to die, because you have machines that got outmoded in the United States or were no longer competitive here. There were peers. This wasn't really something we did, but there were peers where oftentimes Venezuela was presented as a place, as were hydro dams in parts of Africa, where the power costs were so low that you could run these machines into the ground, and folks would. And so these were places that were on the radar. Never really of interest to us at either U.S. Bitcoin or American Bitcoin now, for obvious reasons. But we were aware of these players in the region. The amount of Bitcoin mining in the United States may be shrinking, which to me makes the case for what we do at American Bitcoin all the more important. You're seeing private players to play a bigger role. A lot of the public miners of the past two or three quarters have really shifted towards AI or HPC as their core business. This has resulted in a slowdown, for example, in large-scale headline mining buys. And so the manufacturers are needing to fill that demand void by finding other clients, many of whom are overseas, which means that the manufacturers stay solvent, which is great, but also means that we are losing control of hash rate relative to our peers overseas, and that has implications for U.S. hash rate and U.S. security.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that. I mean, what kind of centralization fears? I know it's always a thing with among Bitcoin. Where do you see that? Obviously we had the China ban, a number of years ago, and then it, decentralized things a lot, and things came over here because of that. And now we have this, just natural kind of ebb and flow happening again. So when you zoom out, like, what do you see when you're kind of looking across the horizon?
Decentralization to me is core to the Bitcoin ethos and remains really important. And I don't believe that having a lot of power in the United States that is running Bitcoin mines is a threat to the decentralization of Bitcoin. You've got, between hobbyist miners and the majors, it's pretty widely dispersed. Now, that being said, you could think about the U.S. mining as an interesting pocket in the globe. We've got the best rule of law. We've got the best, or some of the deepest energy markets in the world. And we've got great capital markets access. There's not a lot of other places where you can actually get the kind of opportunity you can get in the United States. There's an old expression that God doesn't give with both hands. I think in the case of the United States, he actually did. In a lot of these other markets, you really do have to trade off on one of those three things in order to get hash rate online. It's not my preference. I would much rather do it here in the United States. I think it's great for the business, and I think it's also just great for the country.
A minute ago, we were talking, briefly about central banks and stuff like that, what's going on. But do you think that Bitcoin is the end game for a lot of central banks, whether it's here in the U.S. or, is it going to be the speculative attack you see, just kind of this end game, whether it's a year from now, 5, 50 years from now? Like, where do you see this end game with Bitcoin, speculative attacking the banks?
Yeah, right now it's like a small crack, in the dam. It's a leak in the global monetary supply, right? It is a place for people to preserve value and preserve their wealth. That is a step outside of a lot of the traditional attempts, whether it's condos in Miami, dollar bills with rubber bands, whatever. This is now a decentralized, hard coded schedule of Bitcoin with its very limited emissions. That, I think, will just continue to grow. Again, it goes back to diffusion into evangelization. More people are aware of Bitcoin every day. That is a one-way path. They may not be going out and buying it on a given day. Bitcoin's somewhat funny because oftentimes price follows sentiment, but with crypto, oftentimes sentiment follows price. So when Bitcoin starts to heat up, everyone gets a little excited and their sentiment gets better, and then it heats up even more. It's a reflexive loop. And so I'm exceedingly patient. I think that you're going to continue to see evangelization. I think you're going to continue to see the value prop. Even if not in the United States, overseas as well, people want to find a place to store value, and real estate historically has been a thing, but fear of expropriation is very real, or fear of having your currency debased. I think stable dollars are a boon to the United States. I think they're a boon for people that are in the middle class of countries where they've historically lost their savings. There's numerous examples in Latin America, Argentina, among others, and in Africa. Currency crises are literally everywhere. There's a quote I like from Kant that out of the crooked timber of humanity, nothing straight was ever made. And you could think that a currency that is run by committees is no different and will run into the exact same issues over time. Bitcoin, given the decentralized nature and the very transparent sort of governance or lack of governance, provides that antidote.
Yeah, it goes back to the you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. Everyone, just a piece of code forcing everyone to change around it. What are your thoughts? You mentioned that the amount of hash rate that you guys have in American Bitcoin, and it was something I wanted to ask you too. Just your thought about total hash rate, which has just been climbing. I think over the last year, it's up 30%, or maybe over 30%, which is incredible. I feel like it's been, had the dip in 2020, was it 2021 with China, and, for obvious reasons. And then boom, it's been taken off every year. It's just growing. So the security network never stronger. What are your thoughts on, does price lead hash, or does hash lead price?
It's a great angle. Does price lead hash, or does hash lead price? They're commingled, but I don't think it's not a one-to-one. And what I mean by that is the hash rate is itself downstream of CapEx, typically, right? Yeah. And advancements in chip technology, et cetera. But fundamentally, someone has got to be paying for these chips. There would not be new hash rate if people were not buying new chips, and so it's downstream of capital. The CapEx itself is downstream of a few things. It's downstream of demand. It's also, or perceived demand. It's also downstream of things like rates, interest rates. And so it's a little different than the price of Bitcoin. The price of Bitcoin, because the supply is largely fixed, there's only so many Bitcoin left. Most of it's vastly been mined. The amount that's being mined per day today, it's about 450 coins per day, is not enough to really, really melt the supply-demand gap in a way that I think historically it did. I know people are proponents of, say, the 4-year cycle, et cetera. When there were thousands of new coins entering the system, for it to hold value, you would need a commensurate amount of buying pressure to happen in a given day. And that would need to happen every day forever in order for it to hold parity. with the price of with the emissions factor reducing, and of course in a matter of 2-3 years it will reduce again. I think you're going to see less of a relationship. I know between, for example, the miners and Bitcoin emissions and price. Hash rate, where's that going? It's going up. Now you could think of this as there are there's sort of three levels. There's the velocity, there's the acceleration, and there's a third one called jolt, which is how much is the acceleration accelerating. So in the case of hash rate, the first order, it's continuing to climb, as you've seen. The rate of that climb, so if you go to the next derivative, the rate of the climb is slowing down, or at least recently. Obviously, this is quarter by quarter, has been slowing down. Been a few factors for that. China had another crackdown on some of the dark mining, or the mining that was illicitly happening there. That would blunt some of the rise in hash rate. There have been less capital expenditure headlines from major miners in the United States. That would also slow the rate of acceleration. And so the third rate, which is the rate of acceleration accelerating? No, it's not right now. It's really velocity's up. Acceleration, and then jolt or jerk is that third level. It's not currently a problem, but I'm very mindful of this, right? Because if people start to swarm into these chips, you could again see this. But for the time being, hash price is not really in a place where you're going to see a lot of new entrants. I think a lot of Bitcoin mining today in the United States, the parties you see are the parties that will be there. There's an incumbency effect that's happening. There's been a consolidation, or there'll continue to be consolidation among the major miners. I don't think it's to the degree that would present a decentralization risk. American mining is only a plurality to begin with. It's not even a majority. But I think you will see fewer names in the coming years. I think the middle ground miners are the ones that have really disappeared. You used to have different scales. Say the 1 megawatt guys, the 10 and the 100. I mean, 100 megawatts used to be huge, right? And 110 and 100 were big. 1 megawatt, to give a sense of scale, was like 600 houses worth of electricity. That was large enough to be a pro, but was not. You were not necessarily the marquee miner. The middle ground has eroded. I really think it's just tough. If you're not public, you don't have access to the capital markets in the way that the majors do. So it's really tough to raise funds, and you still need to find a way to find 100 megawatts of cheap flare or something. And that's not easy. The 1 megawatt and the 2 megawatt guys, I mean, if you had a pipeline, you and I could get a container going and have a good time at it, but it doesn't scale. And then the big guys have the benefit of scale, but the middle guys, that's a tough one to stay in.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because that brings me back to when I was doing real estate full time. After I left professional hockey, I went and did real estate for 10, 12 years, raising money, apartment complexes, helping people, all this stuff. And in that world, I mean, you could get the small, 1 to 4 units, something like that. It was kind of like your mom and pop, like it was kind of easy-ish to do it. But then you get like 10 to 100 units, and that's that middle ground. I always called it no man's land, because it's too small to have management, come in from the outside, and you got to operate it. And then like any 100 units and up, you could get, like you said, public financing. You could have huge management companies come in and manage it for you. So it's this weird middle ground that always seems to be the part that gets squeezed. So it's really wild.
It is. It's a sign of, it's not all industries act this way, but it is a sign of the industry maturing. It just is what it is. There's such a capital arms race that I don't see that changing. The middle, I just think to become a new entrant in Bitcoin mining today, you need to be a master of. There's like a few different areas, right? You need to have a pretty good understanding of megawatts. You need to have a pretty good understanding of machines. You need to have a pretty good understanding of money and raising capital. And you need to have a management team that's able to cohesively weave those three together. So the 4 M's there, that's hard to walk up to home plate and think you're going to hit a triple. I mean, that's pretty dicey now at the scale we're operating, where we've got very sophisticated energy trading going on in the back end, and algorithms and construction teams, and 1 container is good, or 1,000 containers are good, but something in the middle is a little tough.
I think there's a lot of people, and we mentioned this past year or so, and not living up to people's expectations. Like, how do you think game theory plays out? Because I feel like there's a lot of Bitcoiners. I know part of me thinks this too, where you believe in game theory, and hey, when other countries announce, hey, we're going to do things, whether it's an SBR, or we're doing this, or Bhutan's mining, and then El Salvador is doing this, and all these things are going on. Does Bitcoin, and even mining itself, become a geopolitical weapon? Like, when does game theory play out? When you have this, the Jason Lowry, hey, I'm going to the Space Force, and the cyberspace is going to be the next frontier. It feels like that a lot, right? We have the Arctic, and the fight over the Arctic. We're talking about Greenland, in which the Arctic part doesn't get talked about that much at all, like in mainstream news or legacy news, even on Twitter. Really, it's a thing that's kind of, but the power of the Arctic, and whether it's missiles flying over the Arctic, which is where they would go, or it's, just the cooler temperatures, the Earth doesn't spin as much. All these little things that go into it. Is that the world we're kind of just like we're entering, where hopefully it goes that way? We're just fighting over hash power and not, we don't have missiles flying over the Arctic. So like, how do you kind of see all this playing out?
To the question about game theory, since that's a topic that you've just brought up, I think what's interesting here as someone that's such a proponent of game theory is that there's a few different games that are played. There's the obvious ones, things like the prisoner's dilemma, which is like who's going to defect, who's going to coordinate. It's going to be very interesting. So as you look about Bitcoin and you look about currency in general, currency is a coordination game. I have to give you a piece of paper that you have to accept. So we have to coordinate on it. And you're doing that because there's a third party who themselves has a fourth party who's going to take that currency and flip it around. So there's a coordination issue. At a certain point with currency, if somebody says, I don't want that piece of paper, or you think there's a risk that happens, then the game theory massively comes to play, and there's a risk of defection. And so much of any system is about ensuring that defection doesn't happen, or a defection does happen. Like you basically using the power of, say, the federal government, as was done under a prior administration, to force crypto folks to defect from the crypto group, right, and no longer cease and desist and not do their activities and defect, and to avoid allowing the crypto people to coordinate the way that they want to do to advance their own interests. So as I think about the role of Bitcoin mining and coordination, what's interesting is that the guys in Bhutan, as an example, I don't view them as competitors, which is kind of an interesting thing. I view them as peers, would be the word I would use for a group like that. Yes, their hash rate means that they're competing. If you were to plug in a BitAxe or a USB mining stick and be like a little tiny bit of hash, technically you're my competitor. But I don't take that view. I look more holistically at what we've been able to achieve as an industry. And I want you out there getting excited about it. I want you to be decentralizing the grid. And I think that forces me to have a little bit more rigor.
In your eyes, do you think that speaks more to the positive sum incentives of Bitcoin in the network rather than the zero sum fiat games that we play now, basically?
So yeah, I as I was saying, I think that for you, it's about finding folks that in your industry that actually help inspire excellence, and so you can become better at what you do by looking and learning from your peers. We had peers in Bitcoin, for example, that were early into immersion cooling or early into direct to chip liquid cooling, and even if we didn't choose to employ those technologies ourselves, as a collective, we were pushing the industry forward and making the network more secure by doing so.
Is that because the incentives of Bitcoin? Because I feel like if you go to a fiat business conference, it's not like, we're not on the same team really, right? Like if we go to like some marketing conference, it's not like I'm on the same team as these guys over here, but it does, really, I do feel like Bitcoin, and I love your thought on that, just like being a positive sum game where like, hey, we all own Bitcoin. So like if they're doing this and they're hardening the network, or this company's building this, like I win too. We all hold Bitcoin. It's like we all win. Is that kind of why do you think that's why you feel that way?
I agree with you. Bitcoin is, to me, not zero sum. It is the only zero sum part of Bitcoin is that there's a pretty fixed amount, so you better get what you can while you can get it.
Yeah.
But in terms of the industry, I'm rooting for my peers. Another new category of companies emerged recently, the Treasury companies, which we may want to talk about. And the Bitcoin Treasury companies were applying a new tactic to try to amass as much Bitcoin as possible. That was something that really those Sailor pioneered it a few years ago, really took off in 2025. And obviously there were some massive upticks on that. There was a shift in sentiment against some of them as well, but they were learning by doing. And I view that as an opportunity for the industry to learn from its peers and think about what are the ways to get people into Bitcoin, whether it's through mining, whether it's through accumulation, treasury, et cetera, with the central goal of education and moving us towards a Bitcoin paradigm.
There's one thing more important than Bitcoin: the time you have and the people and relationships you build. In a world full of noise, the real signal is meeting with other Bitcoiners IRL, finding Bitcoin-only events, connecting face-to-face, and supporting the circular economy through Bitcoin-friendly merchants around the world. That's exactly what Club Orange is built for. Build your circle. Support Bitcoin-only companies. The only place in the world you can find all that in one spot is the Club Orange app on iOS or Android. Go to cluborange.org, what used to be the Orange Pill app, or scan the code here. Now that you have your hardware wallet, the key data generated needs to be stored in something forever that can withstand fire, flood, nuclear fallout, checks, hockey pucks. This is your 12-word C plate, your 24-word C plate. After a lot of people asking for your 12-word C plate, here it is, stampseed.com, code Brandon for 15% off. After everything that's gone on in the world, fires we've seen in the Pacific Palisades, what we've seen happen in Hawaii, everything gone. Titanium seed plates withstands everything. Your posterity will thank you. It only takes a few minutes. Don't let these little things, these small investments scare you from the most important aspects of Bitcoin and the first money we have ever conceived here on earth. Stampseed.com, code Brandon for 15% off.
Everything you are learning in this episode is completely moot and does not matter if you hold Bitcoin and are still leaving it on an exchange or sharing keys and your KYC information with a third party. This is your wake-up call now. You are only self-sovereign if you alone hold the keys to your wealth. 100% self-custody sounds daunting at first. Believe me, I lost 2 years of massive gains over a decade ago because I was worried about taking the few minutes it took to understand self-custody. And that's exactly why you need to talk to my friends, Tony Yazbek and his team at the Bitcoin Way. We just interviewed Tony recently, has over 80,000 views, an overwhelming response. People love his story and the simplicity he shares of how easy it is to custody and take ownership of the greatest money we've ever seen. They'll train you to do it right the first time. Head on over to thebitcoinway.com/Brandon to schedule a free 30-minute consultation today. Their 5-star rated service is exactly what you need. Quit sitting on your hands like I did and get started today. Again, that's thebitcoinway.com/BRANDON.
Do you think that the treasuries, just in general, like you said, obviously Saylor started it, and there's been, I don't know, copycats, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word for it, right? But people just realizing like, hey, Bitcoin is something that I need. Every company is, every country, every family, right? So everyone needs it. How do you see the landscape playing out? I mean, just overall, like, do you think it's been positive some? I mean, like, I guess part of me a little bit, it feels like maybe have we taken our eyes off the prize a little bit? We've been so focused on ETFs and price just for everything that it feels like maybe some of us, maybe it's me, maybe it's these guys over here. Like we could have been building something else or did something else for adoption, and we're focused over here on Wall Street. Like, how do you just see the space evolving?
Bitcoin is a complex system the way it is today. It combines the sort of mimetic aspects of religion with the utility of money. So it's in a unique position. What that means, though, is there is a tendency to use the religion aspect. There is a tendency of folks to take on a little bit of a messianic a belief that something's coming, something imminent is coming, right? And so the narrative as to what that imminent thing would be, there's a few folks on Twitter, I'm sure who would love to say that they just got off the phone with XYZ and that there's there's imminent capital inflow. You know exactly the kind of folks I'm talking about. That tactic is fraught, in my opinion, because the ETFs did come to pass. A pro crypto administration did come to pass, but rapture didn't happen. we didn't ascend into the Bitcoin standard, ex post as soon as we got these things. Yep. And to me, trying to keep my head in a rational world, that's okay. I mean, it's not. I wish it were that simple. I wish if ETF then adoption. Yes, in the variable, but it's a multivariate system, right? So yes, there's a BlackRock ETF. That means BlackRock is in part now wedded to Bitcoin adoption because they get fees from the ETF. So Bitcoin itself is being evangelized by BlackRock. I mean that is tremendous, but that wasn't the silver bullet to get from a $2 trillion asset to a $20 trillion asset, or gold closer to a $30 trillion asset. It's going to take more than a couple of ETFs, right? This is going to be a concerted all-front effort. It's going to be central banks putting it in the vault. It's going to be some companies putting it on the balance sheet. It's going to be miners mining. It's going to be folks transacting. There is a lot of things you do. Now, gold had a 10 to 60,000 year head start. So I listen, it's going to take a little bit of time. I don't think it's going to take that much time, but at the same time, I do try and steer away from the imminent rapture narrative that I think can sometimes take over the industry, because I do see that results in disappointment. I think price action is directionally going the way you want to go. If you look over a 3-year average, 4-year average, hell, even a 1-year average on the given day, if you tie your beliefs to a single catalyst, and that catalyst actually happens, but you move the goalposts to worldwide Bitcoin adoption based off of an ETF, for example. Well, then you're going to be disappointed by the good news, and then that's a bit of a bummer.
Yeah, it's a way to drive yourself insane too.
Yeah,
so that's well said. What are your thoughts just on AI? Obviously, quantum's been a big thing recently. Is that especially as a miner, as a node runner, as a miner, all these things that uphold the system. Obviously, I would love your thoughts just on some of these things that are coming down the pike. I mean, whether they're in the next 6 months or year, or the next 10 years, 20 years, like they're coming. So what, would love your just broad brush thoughts on what's coming.
Yeah. Quantum's funny, funny in an interesting way, not funny in a hilarious way. Quantum to me is funny because it is either imminent, or it is 6 years away, or it is 16 years away, and your mileage may vary, and it seems somewhat tied to how much venture capital you need to raise. But look, I speak to a lot of folks. I'm a nerd about the technology, compute in general, whether it's Bitcoin or HPC or quantum. So I speak to folks that are engineers that are more involved with quantum day to day in its many research forms, and I think to your earlier point about game theory, it is helpful to map out what the game theory is going to be on Bitcoin and quantum. If quantum were to happen tomorrow, you could try and be predictive a bit about knowing what you know about the system, knowing what you know about people, what will happen. I've written about this as well on X. I put a post out about some of the game theory because it's a topic I love on Bitcoin and quantum. It's not something that keeps me up at night, but it is something that I keep in view. You've seen a few solutions. I've been DM'd lists of solutions for things that can be done to get Bitcoin ready for a post-quantum world. I think it's good that these preparations are being made, but in many ways, because Bitcoin is so decentralized, it is almost like a government. In that sense, like a democracy, right? It's a lot of people voting for the network, or maybe more of a republic because you have to be validating blocks. But the issue that you have with this form of government is that there's an old joke that government is really good at doing two things, which is nothing and overreacting. And so when it comes to quantum, it is probable that there will be some headway, but there will not be a sufficient headway before your Q day. And then immediately Q day plus one, there is overreaction. And there are 10 different solutions all being proposed at the same time. And some subset of them will happen. And the supply of Bitcoin may go from 21 million to 15 million or whatever percentage can be protected. That's all possible. But to me, that actually doesn't really hurt the value prop of Bitcoin, because I'm confident that in a assuming quantum comes to pass the way it's predicted, a post-quantum world would still have a place for Bitcoin in it as a belief system. And what I mean by that is a very conservative, decentralized, fixed supply emissions token. Like you don't actually need SHA-256 to survive in a perpetuity, which is the encryption schema that Bitcoin uses. You don't need that to be true for Bitcoin to be true. That is my belief. I think Bitcoin at this point has somewhat begun to almost transcend some of those initial encryption modalities. I think they're still critical. I don't want Bitcoin to be hacked. I don't want the integrity of Bitcoin to be attacked. But I believe that Bitcoin as a belief system is more resistant to these sorts of attacks than it would be if I was viewing this as like a bank's email system or whatever. Like the confidence of the US dollar in a world in which people can hack and print infinite dollar, that to me is much more problematic than Bitcoin, so long as sufficient amount of folks can coordinate around what a post-quantum Bitcoin should look like.
Yeah, and I agree. I feel like it's more along the lines of the toothpaste is out of the tube, right? Like once you discovered fire, and it's going to reshape, adapt. It's going to be something forever, whether it looks like just like today or it's different 10 years, whatever. So I couldn't agree more.
What do you, this actually on that note, it's very interesting. This is where we're American Bitcoin. So I got to plug the founding fathers, of course. This is where I think the United States was prescient, because things like the First Amendment, freedom of speech, or things like the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, in a world where communications can happen via satellite and you effectively have uncensorable internet, or at least very hard to censor the internet, and we're headed that direction, whether it's through Starlink or some of the rivals, there will be multiple satellite. It'll be very hard for a medium power country to truly censor its citizens. And so suddenly there's again, preference cascade. The emperor has no clothes. It's very hard to censor people. And so if your society hasn't had microdoses of freedom of speech, it could find itself very susceptible to disruption. Whereas I think in the United States is almost always running a low-grade fever, and is thus very resistant to getting fully taken over by the woke mind virus, or pick your belief system, ideology, meme of choice. The United States, because it's had this freedom of speech for centuries now, it has a resiliency there. And with the Second Amendment, now the issue is 3D printing guns. And what are we going to do about that? Well, in the United States, you can just go buy it. So we've had to learn to build a system that is resilient to these technologies. And so I view the United States having a pro-crypto administration as we do right now. It's actually no different. The United States is going to have to build, and is already building, a system that is resilient to an alternative currency like Bitcoin. Whereas there are other countries where their solution is going to be to freeze the currency pegs and act in denial and basically try to put their finger to prevent the dam from breaking. But I think those founding fathers were right. You need to build your system with resiliency from day one. Yeah,
absolutely. And the irony of all of that too is when governments do that, people run to the exits even more, right? What are they looking for? They're looking for those things. And you're right. And America is a great example of that. Because again, whether the government, 3 or 2 or 10 generations from now or cycles from now becomes super chaotic and trying to take all these. Well, guess what? Like you said, the guns are there still. Like you can't legislate away the guns. So they're there. The ideas already.
And Bitcoin's 40 million plus Americans own Bitcoin. I believe was a stat I saw. I think that was from River. That if the U.S. government starts to move to make that worthless, you're going to upset your citizens. And so long as those citizens have a voting power, which they do, Bitcoin and crypto is actually, interestingly, a voting issue for some folks. Right now, it is one of a plethora of issues that people need to weigh their preferences as to what they're going to vote based off of. But the same reason why, there's a great line about home ownership, which is that no one ever washes a rental car. And so when you own your home, you take ownership in your community. Folks that own a little bit of Bitcoin or got off of zero and have a couple of Satoshis have some skin in the game now, right? And so it's not so easy to try and debase that.
So, government is a collection of people. And I'm obsessed with the founding fathers and just, all this stuff. So it's like, people think, oh, the government doesn't like it. I mean, at the end of the day, governments are groups of people. So they will get into Bitcoin. Their family gets into Bitcoin. And you start realizing you don't change Bitcoin, it changes you. Naturally, government starts to defund itself just naturally as this virus continues out, does it not?
Let's actually use that as an analogy. So the government is a collection of people, but in many ways, governments or these political blobs, as we might call them, they have their own emergent behaviors that happen at a higher level, right? We are, to use an analogy, we are maybe like neurons or red blood cells in the organization that is the United States, which is this blob that is really trying to first and foremost perpetuate itself, right? This is true of the People's Republic of China or whatever. Like these are these institutional blobs. And what's interesting is to use your framing, Bitcoin is a virus, right? Or maybe it's like E. coli. It's like something in that, it's a part of the microbiome. And so it is probably good that it has been introduced, and I think the U.S. is being inoculated, right, through exposure to Bitcoin, et cetera. But you're right, like the U.S. government is made up of people. What governments don't like, so there's a book by James Scott, but Seeing Like a State, what governments don't like is at a certain level, they don't like things that they don't control, obviously, right? And the first thing that governments do to make things controllable is make them legible. And so you've actually already seen this happen with cryptocurrency, for example, in the United Kingdom. The UK is in the process, and they've been poking at this a few years. They want to know all your crypto wallets. They want to know every crypto wallet you've got. They want it reported. Why do they need that information? Because the first step towards control is legibility and being able to see what's out there, right? This is the thing with census. How can you tax people if you don't know how many people you have, right? So these informational activities are the first symptom of an effort towards control by this emergent behavior body that sort of sits above people. But to your point, if you get people wedded to crypto and Bitcoin, they're going to resist that hive mind. They're going to slow roll it a bit, and I think that's to their benefit, frankly. So we'll see. Again, there's 190 or so countries in the United Nations, right? And it's somewhat of a laboratory. Some have gone very pro crypto. El Salvador, very uniquely is somewhat of a trial bit for that. I think the UAE has done a lot of interesting kind of pro crypto maneuvering as well. And so we're going to see these different laboratories of these blobs or these public polities. And I'm most bullish on the United States, but I'm open to learning from other ones as well. That being said, one of the biggest sort of insights that I was once told that I really think about is so much of life and success is determining the difference between what is a cyclical trend and a secular trend. Cyclical trends go up and down. Secular trends over time just go up. It's a one directional trend, right? And so human connectivity is a secular trend, right? People used to live in little tribes and they would communicate via drum beats and things like that. And then over time we got horseback and the Pony Express and then Telegram. And over time, the velocity of information, and now we've got fiber optic high frequency trading cables. That has been that to me, that's not, I hope that's not cyclical. That should ideal human information should be a one-way, it should be a one-way trend. And so as I look at Bitcoin, I think Bitcoin is a belief system. I don't know if SHA-256 Bitcoin in its current incarnation via the Bitcoin Core, I don't know if it's that final state. I don't know if that's what Bitcoin looks like in 10, 50, 100 years, but Bitcoin as a concept is something that I believe is a secular trend and is truly one direction. And on the way, we will see many market cycles. We are in one now. We are always in the cycle. But no, if you can really zoom out for a moment and see that secular trend, I think it can give folks the conviction they need to stay the course.
What are your thoughts on AI? We touched on this a minute ago. We talked about quantum a little bit, but just AI in general. Do you think it's
is this going to be, something massive? It's going to be taken over. I mean, I talked earlier about like everyone's got a different opinion. Some people think it's just like the next ESG. It's going to be totally collapse on itself, blah, 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 right? Like everyone's got their narrative. Where do you see AI fitting in this picture going forward?
I saw a fantastic chart from, I believe, the Dallas Fed, which I recommend everyone to Google, where they were asked to project the implications of AI on the U.S. economy. And the chart gave basically three options. Either, AI utopia, it's a hockey stick to infinity, bread and circuses for everybody. AI apocalypse, Terminator, we're doomed here. It's a nosedive, or 3 to 5% GDP growth over the foreseeable future. To which I look at this chart and I'm like, I mean, this chart's right. I don't know what line we're on, but I think something's going to happen on this chart. And so I think I refer to that chart in sort of a moment of jest, but also it is very hard to tell. I think that you're going to see that, going back to the idea of velocity, acceleration, and jolt. We are finally hitting a pace with AI and sort of high performance computing technology where the jolt, that third level, is now perceptible. People always notice velocity. It's like, hey, man, my iPhone's a little faster. Okay, that's kind of cool. It's kind of linear. Mm-hmm. And people started to notice, hey, like the pace of change is picking up. Like my iPhone's getting fat. Like if you I don't know if you ever played Nintendo 64, but we went from that to virtual reality pretty fast. Yeah. And so that seemed to really accelerate that speed of advancements. I think the thing with AI is it is actually advancing so quickly now that humans, which we're running some old school programming here, we're finally able to perceive that third layer, and we're like, wow, the acceleration is accelerating. What does that mean? I wish I had the answer, but you see it. So the idea that it's not that the image models are going to be twice as good next year, or they're going to be 4 times as good next year. They could be 16 times as good because the acceleration is going faster. And so I think there are a lot of unforeseen consequences. Not exactly a hot take, but I do think that diffusion, to tie it all together, is going to be a bit lumpy. I think it's going to be a bit lumpy. I think that if you are a user of X, if you're a Bitcoin, if you're plugged into the hive mind, hell, even if you're a Redditor or whatever, you're probably you're aware that ChatGPT has siblings called Grok and Claude and things like that, and maybe you use one or the other. The average American is not even paying they're $20 a month. Like they're using the freebie one, and it's fine, and it's basically a really good recipe generator combined with Wikipedia, and it does their math homework, and that's incredible. But at the same time, last weekend I coded a very elaborate ERCOT, it's the power grid in Texas, an ERCOT transmission queue software suite, which is online. It's ERCOT Q like a line, ERCOTQ.com, where I took the state's data, the state of Texas's data. They've got a bunch of these spreadsheets. They've got a bunch of PDFs. It's a real bear to read. And I was able to agentically code a dashboard in a weekend. And I asked Claude at the end how long that would have taken the state to do, and it said 18 to 24 months. And so that took me the better part of 24 hours, right? And I don't know how that shows up in the GDP stats with the Dallas Fed, but that transmission website, the ERCOT Q, has value to people and created value that I'm not sure is going to be expressed in GDP statistics directly. So we're going to have a very lumpy sort of adoption of AI, but you're going to notice some folks are 1,000x as productive, some people are 2 to 3x productive, and some people, nothing's really changed, right?
What is real world, Bitcoin or hyper Bitcoinization or whatever someone wants to call it? What does that look like to you? And I'll just caveat and say, going back to the real estate example, doing that to me, hyper Bitcoinization looks like if you can own a 200 unit apartment complex or whatever, and your tenants are paying you in Bitcoin. To me, that's when I'll kind of feel like, hey, society's healed. It's okay to step outside and do some other things. What does it look like for you?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. That I think that is one. I can see that world. I can see that happening. I think I view there as being sort of three paths. One is kind of a little version of what we have today. Parag Khanna, I think, called it neo-medievalism, but this sort of feudal patchwork of overlapping currencies. There are places where the dollar is accepted, but they're dollar denominated, but they're not really dollar countries. But you can pay in greenbacks. There's other countries where they keep the foreign exchange basket somewhat on a peg. Riyadh, the petrodollar is a famous example. So obviously in Saudi Arabia, you're not using dollars per se, but you're using something that rhymes with dollars. dollars when you do the exchange rate. That's kind of the status quo world. There's a world in which, due to increased adoption of stable coins, you get hyper dollarization of economies that are less, or not the economies, but of middle classes and small businesses that are less believing in their own currency than the U.S. dollar. So you're in Nigeria, and you may get paid in naira, but as fast as possible you're flipping it for dollars on USDT or C or whatever your flavor of stablecoin is. I think that's a possibility. The third is you've lost faith in the U.S. dollar as a store of value, and you don't want euros and you don't want RMB, and you're looking at gold and silver and Bitcoin, and that's the head-to-head match, and Bitcoin wins. I think that's also a possibility. So there are a lot of permutations here. I think the answer is probably as chaotic as it sounds, is somewhere in the middle. I think there are places that stubbornly hold on to the word currency until it's a piece of paper, toilet paper that is useless. There's other places that go very hard into U.S. dollars or stable euros or whatnot, and then there are places that go full Bitcoin standard. It will take time, and I think to your early comments, there are incumbents that don't like this, right? I think the IMF, as an example, the IMF really has put some pressure on El Salvador. Been a bit of a bully about them. Central bankers don't like this, and historically Bitcoiners don't always like central bankers, so let's say it's mutual. But it's going to be a weird forced coexistence, because when the Bitcoin market cap was 2 billion, or let's say 200 billion, it was ignored as a pet rock side project. At 2 billion, suddenly Morgan Stanley and BlackRock and everyone wants to do an ETF or get a piece of the pie. At 20 billion, your standard IRA advisor is slipping it in there in the portfolio for the retirees, along with gold and things like that. At 50 billion, now to your point, I think that's where with real estate, people are starting to realize that they prefer the credit risk of Bitcoin or Bitcoin-backed instruments than they do to the dollar or things like that. So circuitous path, I will reinforce what I said earlier, which is I am not a catalytic thinker. Or if there's a catalyst, it's not the one people think. This is people look back at 1929. There was a horrendous stock market crash, but they don't say that this is because RCA, which was the top one of the top radio stocks, this was all the fault of the radio tech people. And if we just were less excited about radio, we wouldn't have had the Great Depression. It doesn't work like that. It was multivariate. Auto loans are through the roof right now. Student loan delinquencies. There's a list of about 10 or 20 things that everyone's expecting to pop, and arbitrarily it could be any one of them, and it could co-tangle into everything else. But where Bitcoiners, I think, stand apart or stand distinct is that we are, to tie it all at the beginning, we are equipped for a volatile world. Bitcoiners are okay with that chop, because to us, confusingly, the distress is a sign that Bitcoin's working. It's like seen as a validation of our belief system. And that to me, much like many religions tied together, many religions view that kind of that suffering or that dealing with the non-believers, that martyrdom, that is taken as validation in the belief set. And so I think as Bitcoiners have been pilloried, it has forced us to actually treat each other as friends and as peers as opposed to competitors. Where if we were all riding the gravy train, we probably would be a bit more jockeying with each other, and we would not be as friendly. But when you huddle for warmth, you kind of do it together. And so, I think trenches. Yeah, exactly. Yep. So I think we're all brothers in arms, and I think that's a weird psychological quirk that separates Bitcoin from so many other up and coming technologies. I don't think the AI people view themselves as in it together. Maybe the ones who are trying to usher in the utopia do, but I don't. I think AI is very vicious. I think it's there's a internecine conflict of people fighting, and I much prefer the positivity of the Bitcoin world.
Yeah, it's so well said, and that's why I came up with the Fiat Business Conference reference earlier. I mean, you just don't have that. Like no one gets into NVIDIA stock and it's like, oh, my life's changed. Like I've never seen a world like this before. Like only does that happen in Bitcoin. Like I've never seen a money or a protocol, an asset class like that, like Bitcoin in that sense. I'm sure there's some people that either haven't seen you speak in a while or not at all or whatever, but what's the story of the Trumps coming into American Bitcoin and what you are doing? And maybe what are people missing with what's going on there?
Certainly. So HUD 8, which many of the team at HUD 8 came from US Bitcoin Corp. So I was the chief commercial officer at USBTC, HUD 8, and then now president and CFO at American Bitcoin. HUD 8 was in an interesting position. position if you rewind the clock a year. They had an emerging HPC infrastructure business. They had a Bitcoin mining business. They had a stack of Bitcoin. What is interesting about business in the business world is that there are really two forms of business, which is you either bundle things or you unbundle things. And Hut 8 post-merger was a pretty big bundle. We actually had some power plants up in Canada. We had Texan energy power trading stuff. We had a lot of Bitcoin and some data centers in Kelowna and Vancouver and Western Canada. There was a lot going on. And so when you're trying to sell the equity story, folks may ask, why'd you go up or why'd you go down today? And I don't know if I'm supposed to be checking the price of Bitcoin or the price of oil or AI. There was a lot of moving parts into the equity story. And so part of the ideation here was, what if we were to carve out or spin out a pure play, a day one perfect Bitcoin accumulator? And that perfect accumulator, the A in American Bitcoin is American Bitcoin, but could be accumulating Bitcoin. And what we do is we basically will decide, like, hey, what if we took the best parts of mining, which is having right now about 76,000 machines. We got rid of a lot of the SG&A. We would have Hut 8 do the back end, so very lean, just 76,000 machines in a skeleton crew, and it's all Bitcoin upside. And what if we took the new technologies of the treasury companies, so what Strategies pioneered and some of the other ones, we took the parts of that we liked, but again kept it tied to a very understandable Bitcoin business, which is the mining, which is very core and critical to the end. Like, people ask me what I do. Bitcoin mining, we're a net contributor, right? We're not just a pile of Bitcoin. We work for $1, right? Or a Satoshi. So we did that. And then there's layer 3. And layer 3 is the ecosystem application. And how do you become a marquee category leader? And that is where, Eric Trump joined as a co-founder. His brother Don Jr. is an investor and advisor. They had actually had some grievances with the TradFi system. They'd been debanked pretty aggressively over the prior years. They had come around to crypto, and they had not actually had a play in Bitcoin. They had some other crypto aspects they'd been exploring, but Bitcoin was something new to them. It was kind of the perfect match. You had some incredibly articulate strategic guys who have a great story and a great rationale for why sort of a new audience can get into Bitcoin. And again, Bitcoin really comes down to evangelization, and you couple that with a really awesome operating team, a very disciplined group of we're not athletes. I have to give credit where credit is due, but we took our craft very seriously as infrastructure players, and so we combined forces, launched American Bitcoin April 1. We took it public actually in September, so we're trading on NASDAQ. You can find us on Robinhood. And we basically we do exactly what we say on the label. We mine Bitcoin. We run a treasury strategy, so we're able to amass Bitcoin through capital markets, things like an ATM, et cetera. We've not done debt or anything like that yet. We've really focused on our core business and our ATM. But what this provides folks with is a way to get access to Bitcoin that accumulates over time. If they buy spot, that's going to sit there. That's fine. I own spot Bitcoin. Like, you've got some spot, that's fine. If you buy an ETF, it's a functionally equivalent to holding spot Bitcoin for folks. I mean, it's with a custodian, and there's a small fee from BlackRock or whatever, but that's Bitcoin or paper Bitcoin. That's really a 1-to-1 to your purchase price. What's different about American Bitcoin is that the amount of Bitcoin you have per share, or Satoshis per share, grows over time. And as you look at buying into our company, the goal, our North Star, is that the Satoshis per share, the SPS, will go up, and you will see more Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin will appreciate over time. So we all believe Bitcoin will appreciate, but what I'm telling you is not just the price of the Bitcoin will appreciate, but the amount of Bitcoin you have with American Bitcoin. Our objective is that amount of Bitcoin should also appreciate relative to the share count. So it's interesting. It takes the best parts of mining and the best parts of treasury. I want to get more involved on the ecosystem side as well. And DeFi, there are other things we want to announce. We're not quite ready to do that yet, but we're doing a lot, because what America really needed is this pure play category leader that can really stake a flag and say, look, we're proud to be building this business here in the United States. We're proud to be massing Bitcoin. And by the way, look at our financials. We're lean and mean. We're running a tight ship here. You want to buy a miner. We're not just there's no side quests. We are just mining Bitcoin, no other coins. We're not doing AI. Hut 8 is able to do AI stuff on their book. That's fantastic. But if you want Bitcoin, you come to us.
I know one of the things that Bitcoiners always, are like, the Trumps are doing all these wild coins, stuff like that. You can't put words in their mouth, sure, by any means. But do they, like you said, I think people sense that, like, oh, they've got their crypto stuff, but now they're like getting into Bitcoin. Do you have the overall sense of, like, hey, they see Bitcoin now, like they get Bitcoin versus crypto? Like, do they have that? Yeah.
They do that. I appreciate you asking. I think that's a great question. I think it'd be very clear that the Trump ecosystem, it is predicated in part a lot on these American values, right? There's decentralization. There's kind of owning your own stuff. There's putting steel on the ground in the United States. Like, there's a lot of kind of core things that they really want to embody and support. They've done other crypto projects as well, and some of them to great success. But they serve different use cases. I don't often go head to head with other crypto people about they're doing a big Bitcoin's value prop will be here. A lot of folks start with other cryptocurrencies, and then they ultimately come to Bitcoin. It's a big tent. I think Eric and Don appreciate the value of having Bitcoin in their portfolio and what our value prop is. And for us, we've got a very clear mandate. And so for them, they've got a very clear partner in this business. And for us, we take great pride in what we do.
Oh, that's great to hear. I mean, and obviously the mining aspect, and you know what, I was going to ask you this earlier and I forgot actually. This coming from the real estate end of things. I mean, once they kind of saw it, I'm sure their eyes had to kind of light up and be like, oh, this is like, we know real estate. Like, this is exactly what's going on. Like, I feel like the whole world needs to wake up to Bitcoin mining in general. Like, when does the world wake up to this? Like, how are we sleeping on Bitcoin mining?
I think that is the aha moment. Eric likes to talk. Eric likes to talk about how running hotels is hard, and it is hard. There's a hospitality, and there's a lot of staff and things like that. And we took him out to our marquee site, which is called Vega. It's by Amarillo in Texas. It is 5 football fields long. It is 5 football fields of computers, tens of thousands of computers running around the clock, liquid cooled. It is like something out of a sci-fi novel, right? And so Eric is kind of standing in there, and he really gets it. And I think that is not too different from my own experience, where the first time I visited a Bitcoin mine, and you just feel the heft of all that infrastructure, the electricity. You used to be the air, because the airflow was crazy when it was airflow. But like you realize that this was serious. Right. With crypto, there's a lot of puffery and NFT. I don't know. There's a lot of the crypto has a lot of sizzle, right? Yeah. Bitcoin is empirically the stake. We have real steel on the ground infrastructure. We are backing a multi-trillion-dollar asset with a sense of permanency. And for someone who comes from the real estate world like Eric did, it made perfect sense. And so he's really able to see it. And for what he's doing, I think it's a perfect fit.
Yeah. No, it's always so cool. And we made a few sports references, right? But as a hockey player growing up, hockey is one of those sports where it's tough to tell. It's tough to understand it until you're there, right? Like you can't. Hockey's hard to see unless you go to an NHL game. You sit close to the glass, and you're like, wow, I get it now, right? So some things are, like football is great to see on TV. A little harder when you're in the stands. It's opposite with hockey. So yeah, unless you're in that mining facility, it's hard to grasp for people. You still get it all the time, right? Like, I'm sure you get it. I get it. We're like, well, what is Bitcoin? What's mining? Is it just like grasping at the air, right? Like, it's just in the ether, right? It's like no. So. Yeah.
I think that's a good point to kind of like really hone in and conclude on for me, is that like this is an industry that is really predicated upon education. Like that is what joining an emerging industry is. If you're in something new, you're going to spend a lot of time explaining it to people, and you better take joy in that. Yep. Right, we're all teachers. Yep. You better take the pedagogy is an important part of what it means to be a Bitcoiner. It is a game of evangelization and getting people excited. And again, there are different stories for different people. Bitcoin's use case for one person may be different from another, and you need to meet people where they're at. But I'm constantly, whether I'm teaching capital markets or I'm teaching policymakers or I'm teaching new employees, this is a game of education and one that we take great pride in.
So, in putting this all together, what is your end game? What is Matt's end game for Bitcoin? Is it, it could be 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now or 10 years from now or whatever, but what is the market cap of Bitcoin in your eyes? Is it, hey, Bitcoin has to account for all the assets, 900 trillion to 1 quadrillion, all assets? Or is it, part of that, like we mentioned, it was gold earlier, 30 trillion, 20, where's the resting spot? What does Bitcoin have to account for at the end of the day?
It's a great question. So for me, it is going to be commensurate to the amount of trust people have in Bitcoin. It's ironic because Bitcoin is a trustless asset. You're able to, you don't have to rely on a bank and the intermediaries and the government. It's a trustless asset. But in many ways, the market cap of Bitcoin to me is a barometer of trust. And so as you see increased adoption, it's because people trust Bitcoin, either as a means of exchange or as a store of value. And over time, as I think the barometer of trust will go up, and I would love it to be linear. It may be a little bit cyclical. Obviously, these things go up and down. The booms, the bust. I mean, the U.S. dollar after the Civil War was also trash. I mean, there have been currencies today that were not always beloved. I mean, again, like I said, the Bank of England was having a bad time a couple of decades ago. So, but the barometer of trust to me is probably the yardstick. And so, as I think about the end state or the terminal state of what a Bitcoin is worth, it becomes a question of what value do you put on trust and what value do you put on the confidence in having a place to store value outside of other people's, kind of committee run currencies or asset classes. I think Bitcoin can pull money from currencies. I think Bitcoin can also pull value out of the real estate market. People really there's a lot of assets where people look at this not for its utility, but just as a place to park the mojo, to park the fruits of their labors. That's really what they're doing. If you look at a lot of art, do people like Picasso, or do people like the fact that other people like Picasso, right? And so that there's a lot of these little micro asset things that I think Bitcoin at the end of the day, given that it's lightweight, fungible, trustless, programmatic, it will pull a lot of value from this. Is it in the trillions? Of course, it already is in the trillions. Is it in the tens of trillions? 100%. Is it over $100 trillion? And my question is, by that point, what's a dollar worth? I think that's the other thing too. Is in today's dollars, or I mean, I don't know. Dollar doesn't buy me what it bought me a few years ago. So I don't. Yeah, I was joking about how we became a unicorn at ABTC, and I was saying that it gets easier every year. So I think being mindful of that, I would say that there's enormous upside for Bitcoin as it becomes this sort of barometer of trust in an alternative store of value, and the sky is really the limit on that.
It's amazing stuff, amazing talk, Matt. Where can people find anything we didn't hit, and then where can people find you at?
No, I think good tour de force. I tend to think in frameworks, and I think if folks zoom out, they see the forest for the trees here. They're gonna see how exciting the space is and what all we can do. And then in the micro, I think we've got the best team to accomplish our goals in this space. For folks that want to reach out to me, I'm very reachable on X. I tweet on occasion. I read all my DMs. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Happy to chat more, and hope to continue the conversation again soon.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you.
If you like that episode, then you're going to love the playlist we put together for you with our most recent podcast with the top Bitcoiners, sound money, liberty advocates in the world. Go check those out here. We'll see you inside. You're going to love them.